there is a company. It is over 400 years old, and it is outrageously valuable. Forget what you know about modern wealth. Take Apple, take Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. Now add the entire value of Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil producer. Combine all of their market capitalizations, and you still won't reach the peak valuation of this single 400-year-old company. In today's money, it was worth $7.9 trillion. When we think of old money, of dynastic wealth that shapes the world, our minds go to the Rothschilds. We think of the Rockefellers. But we are mistaken. We are looking at the inheritors, not the architects. Long before them, a quiet, ruthless Dutch company built the original blueprint. It was called the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the VOC, or as we know it, the Dutch East India Company. This single entity invented the world's first corporation, launched the first initial public offering, IPO, and created the first modern stock exchange. And in a strange way, this company is still around. But to achieve this, they didn't just invent finance. They invented a new weapon, a weapon built not of gunpowder, but of capital. And the price for this invention was unimaginable. This is the bizarre, brutal story of the $7.9 trillion company and its silent royal partners, the House of Orange. Our story begins not with greed, but with desperation. The year is 1580. On the Iberian Peninsula, a geopolitical earthquake is taking place. Spain has just taken over Portugal, merging two global empires under a single monarchy. Suddenly, this new Spanish-Portuguese union controls vast territories across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. They control the seas. For the Dutch Republic, this is a mortal threat. The Dutch are locked in a bloody, decades-long battle for their very independence from Spain. And now, their enemy has become a leviathan. With Portugal's crown, Spain looks unstoppable. The Dutch knew they could not win a conventional war. They couldn't match them ship for ship or gun for gun. They were cornered. And when you are cornered, you don't play by the rules. You invent new ones. They realized the war would be won not just on the battlefield, but in the ledger book. If they couldn't outmuscle Spain, they would out-finance them. They needed an asymmetric weapon. They needed to weaponize capital. For years, small private Dutch companies had been making dangerous, high-risk voyages to the East Indies, competing with each other and getting picked off by the Portuguese. The Dutch government, the States General, saw this chaos as weakness. They needed a single, unified fist. So, in 1602, they did something unprecedented. They forced 7 of these competing private companies to merge. They created a single monolithic entity, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the VOC. But this was no mere company. On the surface, it looked like a merchant enterprise, designed to trade spices like pepper, cloves, and nutmeg. But under the decks, it was a machine of economic warfare. The Dutch government gave the VOC a 21-year charter, a document that made it a state within a state. This charter gave the VOC a total monopoly on all Dutch trade in Asia. But it went so much further. The company was granted the power to build forts, maintain private armies, and deploy its own naval fleets. It could negotiate treaties with foreign kings as if it were a king. It could declare war, capture territory, and govern entire colonies. This was the master stroke. The Dutch had outsourced their imperialism. But how do you pay for such a thing? How do you fund a private war on the other side of the world? A king would raise taxes, or plunder his nobility. The Dutch Republic didn't have that luxury. Their solution would change the world forever. Instead of funding the empire with the state's money, they would fund it with the people's money. For the first time, ordinary Dutch citizens, the baker, the blacksmith, the merchant, the clerk, could buy a piece of the imperial project. They could fund the ships, the soldiers, and the cannons. And, if those ships returned, they would get a cut of the profits. The VOC could now scale like no kingdom ever had, without a monarch and without ever raising taxes. This was no longer wealth tied to land or titles. This was wealth manufactured, at scale, through markets. They had invented the blueprint, but they still needed the software to run it. The true genius of the VOC was not in its ships, but in its financial architecture. They created the operating system for modern capitalism. It started in August 1602. The VOC opened its subscription books to the public. This was the world's first initial public offering, but the whispers had begun even earlier. The company's charter was so detailed, so far-reaching, that when the shares finally hit the market, capital flooded in. This led to innovation number 1, perpetual shares, and the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Before this, ventures were temporary. You'd fund a single voyage. The ship leaves, it comes back, or it sinks. The profits are divided, and the venture is dissolved. The VOC was different. Its charter was for 21 years. The company was, for all intents and purposes, permanent, and so was its stock. You couldn't just cash in your share after one voyage. If you wanted your money back, you had to find someone else to buy it from you. This simple problem required a revolutionary solution. It gave birth to the world's first permanent secondary market, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, a place where the future of a company was traded every single day. This immediately led to innovation number 2, the first FOMO. With a public market, you now had public price discovery. And with that, you got speculation. Traders weren't just buying shares to hold. They were betting on what those shares would be worth tomorrow. They created markets for options, futures, and arbitrage, all the tools Wall Street uses today. A new kind of psychology was born, fear of missing out. From an index value of just 100 inches, 1,602, VOC shares skyrocketed, peaking at nearly 1,000 inches, the 1,720 seconds, an astonishing tenfold increase, a speculative bubble that made fortunes overnight. This created enormous wealth, but it also created enormous fear. What if the ship sank? What if a fleet was lost in a storm? What if the Portuguese won a battle? What if the trade collapsed? Under the old rules, if you were an investor in a failed venture, you weren't just ruined. You were liable. Creditors could come for your house, your land, your personal possessions. Your family could be destroyed. This fear was the single biggest barrier to large-scale investment. To build a $7.9 trillion empire, the Dutch had to solve it. And they did. With innovation number 3, the most important financial invention of all, limited liability. The VOC's structure, radical at the time, established that a shareholder was only liable for the amount they had invested. If a VOC fleet worth millions sank to the bottom of the ocean, investors only lost what they put in, nothing more. Their personal properties, their homes, their non-company assets were safe. This legal breakthrough changed investing forever. It unleashed a tidal wave of confident capital. It separated the personal assets of the investor from the business liabilities of the corporation. It made catastrophic risk manageable. It allowed investors to pour money into incredibly risky ventures on the other side of the world, knowing their own lives wouldn't be destroyed if it failed. And as we will see, this innovation did something else. It didn't just insulate investors from financial risk, it insulated them from moral risk. It created a legal and psychological shield that allowed civilized people to profit from unspeakable acts, all while keeping their hands clean. To make this all tangible, the VOC introduced innovation number 4, the paper share. They printed actual, physical share certificates, beautifully engraved, stamped, signed, and exchanged freely. For the first time, ownership of a global enterprise was liquid. It could flow smoothly from hand to hand, from city to city, without the need for a royal permission or a family inheritance. The software was complete, a permanent corporation, fueled by public speculation and protected by limited liability. The machine was built. But every machine needs an operator, a silent partner working in the shadows. Across the Dutch Republic, one family watched all of this unfold. They were not merchants, they were royalty, but royalty in a republic. This was the House of Orange-Nassau. Now, when you hear House of Orange, you might think of, well, not these guys. I'm talking about this House of Orange. They were one of the most prominent dynasties in Europe, yet they faced a profound identity crisis. They held no kingdom. In the merchant-run republic, their noble titles meant little. They were squeezed from all sides. At home, the powerful merchant elites of Amsterdam pushed for stronger republican control, suspicious of any one man's power. Abroad, the Catholic superpower of Habsburg Spain still considered Dutch independence a crime, and the House of Orange, a family of traitors, punishable by fire. They had no vast feudal lands to tax, no silver mines to drain, no divine right of kings to invoke. Under the collapse of this old order, the House of Orange faced a simple choice: fade into irrelevance, or adapt. They couldn't rely on inherited gold, so they used the only thing they had left: strategic influence. They made a revolutionary choice. They would rule through the market, not through the crown. The House of Orange didn't run the VOC day to day. They didn't have to, but they helped bankroll it. They tied their future, their fortunes, and their political survival to its success. Their involvement gave them strategic leverage. In a republic where legacy no longer guaranteed power, capital did. Decades later, that quiet connection became official. The stadtholders, the highest-ranking officials in the Republic, often held by the Princes of Orange, became the presidents of both the VOC and its sibling, the West India Company. Men like William IV and William V effectively became the CEOs of the two most powerful corporations on Earth. As the company expanded east, the family rose upwards. They were still nobility without a throne, but their power was now unquestionable. It was a new kind of power, backed not by divine right, but by dividends. The VOC carried the Republic's flag, but it also carried the ambitions of a family building an empire in silence. The VOC did not behave like a business. It moved like a sovereign. That was the entire point. When your market cap dwarfs the GDP of most countries, when your private armies defeat royal powers, you are not just a company. You are an imperial state in your own right. And the VOC's high-tech financial software gave it a scale that was terrifying. At its peak, the company commanded nearly 150 merchant ships and 40 warships. It had 50,000 employees worldwide, a private army of 10,000 soldiers, and a navy that humiliated its rivals. Over the company's 200-year history, more than 1 million people departed the Netherlands bound for Asia, all on the VOC's payroll. They weren't settlers chasing a dream. They were employees of a mega-corporation, sent to build its trade empire across Ceylon, Java, Bengal, and beyond. This workforce ran the VOC's ports, guarded its warehouses, and negotiated with local rulers. And when negotiation failed, they enforced Dutch interests at gunpoint. Nowhere was this dominance more profound than in the epicenter of the company's ambitions, the East Indies. In 1619, the VOC, under the brutal command of Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, captured the city of Jakarta. They razed it to the ground and built a new city on its ruins, in perfect Dutch style. They named it Batavia, the ancient name of the Netherlands. This wasn't just a name change. For 300 years, Batavia stood as the company's Asian command hub. It's why, to this day, you see so much Dutch influence in Indonesian food, language, and architecture. Dutch governors ruled from there, and all surrounding kingdoms answered to its corporate interests. But how was this $7.9 trillion fortune really built? This is the secret. This is the brutal loop that the VOC's charter had opened. The VOC's primary goal was not trade. It was monopoly. They wanted to be the only ones on Earth who could sell cloves, mace, and especially nutmeg. Nutmeg, grown only on a few tiny islands in the Banda Archipelago, was more valuable than gold in 17th century Europe. It was believed to cure everything from the common cold to the plague. Control nutmeg, and you controlled a river of gold. The people of the Banda Islands, however, had been trading with the English, the Portuguese, and others for centuries. They had no interest in an exclusive, low-paying contract with the Dutch. So, the VOC decided to negotiate. In 1621, Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, the same man who founded Batavia, arrived at the Banda Islands. His negotiation was a systematic campaign of terror. The Dutch called it a punitive expedition. It was a massacre. The VOC's private army swept the islands. They destroyed villages, burned crops, and executed the local leaders. Of the 15,000 native Bandanese, it is estimated that fewer than 1,000 survived. Most were killed. The survivors were hunted down and enslaved. The company had achieved its goal. The Bandanese population was effectively exterminated. The VOC then repopulated the islands with Dutch settlers and slaves from other regions, who were forced to cultivate nutmeg exclusively for the company. They had their monopoly. This was not an isolated incident. This was the business model. In Amboina, the VOC tortured and executed English and Japanese traders, accusing them of a conspiracy to seize the Dutch fort. This Amboina massacre poisoned Anglo-Dutch relations for decades. In Batavia, tensions between the Dutch and Chinese civilians exploded in 1740. The result was a massacre where Dutch soldiers and citizens slaughtered an estimated 10,000 people of Chinese descent. In spice-producing regions, the company established a system of forced labor, compelling indigenous populations to cultivate crops for the company's benefit, leading to widespread suffering and deprivation. This is the true, horrifying genius of the VOC's financial design. Remember, innovation number 3, limited liability. Back in Amsterdam, thousands of decent, church-going Dutch citizens were getting rich. They were reading about record profits and cashing their dividend checks. They were insulated from the financial consequences of failure. But more importantly, they were insulated from the moral consequences of success. The massacres on Banda were not committed by the Dutch state. They were committed by the company. A company they just happened to own, a tiny, liquid, tradable piece of. The legal shield of the corporation became a moral shield for the investor. They could profit from atrocities committed on the other side of the world without ever having to see the blood, hear the screams, or feel the slightest bit of personal, legal, or moral responsibility. The VOC hadn't just invented the corporation, it had invented the psychopathy of the corporation. A system where profits are privatized, but accountability is socialized, or, in this case, simply erased. That is the brutal secret to the $7.9 trillion. Even a giant has limits. By the late 1700s, the VOC was rotting from within. The company that ruled the seas began to sink under the weight of its own success. Power had scaled fast, but oversight failed to keep up. Corruption was rampant. Officials were focused more on their own pockets than the company's future. Decision-making turned sluggish, and the world had changed. Britain and France, having learned from the Dutch, were now fierce competitors. Global markets became less tolerant of monopolies. By 1795, the VOC was bankrupt. The Dutch government, itself in turmoil, stepped in and nationalized the collapsing company. In 1799, its charter quietly expired. The empire had collapsed. But the architecture of its power, its financial DNA, was immortal. The idea of the VOC was too powerful to die. It just mutated. It spread. This financial virus first crossed the English Channel. In 1688, England was in a political crisis. They ousted their king, James II, and in a move known as the Glorious Revolution, they invited a Dutchman to take the throne, William of Orange. William arrived in England not just with troops, but with a mindset shaped by the Dutch Republic. He saw markets not as a distraction from power, but as the tool to sustain it. During his reign, England launched its own version of the Dutch model. They created the Bank of England. They introduced government bonds. They began funding their wars through capital markets. The British Empire, which would come to rule a quarter of the globe, was built using a Dutch financial blueprint. The virus also crossed the Atlantic. Decades earlier, in 1624, the other Dutch powerhouse, the West India Company, founded a trading post on the southern tip of a long, wooded island. They called it New Amsterdam. It was laid out not as a settlement, but as a commercial hub. Its legal systems, credit customs, and global trade links were all Dutch. In 1664, the British took it over and renamed it New York. But they didn't wipe the city clean. They kept the Dutch structure. They kept the financial habits, the legal systems, the commercial-first attitude. The DNA of Wall Street was not written by the English. It was written in Dutch. And what of the Netherlands itself, and the House of Orange? Today, the Netherlands is no longer a seafaring empire. It is a financial empire. It consistently ranks as one of the most competitive economies on Earth, a magnet for global capital. It is a world leader in foreign direct investment, with Dutch holdings abroad exceeding $3.5 trillion. An astonishing footprint for a tiny country. And the House of Orange? They still reign. The crown may be ceremonial, but their connections are anything but. In 1907, a new titan emerged. The Royal Dutch Petroleum Company merged with the British Shell Transport and Trading Company. The result: Royal Dutch Shell. For over a century, it would dominate the global energy sector, and once again, a Dutch company carried not only capital, but a royal title. It wasn't alone. Today, giants like the ING Group, one of Europe's most powerful financial institutions, trace their roots back to this same Dutch strength, all leaning on the corporate architecture and legal protections that echo the VOC era. When we think of capitalism, we think of the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan. But these figures didn't invent the model, they just followed it. They perfected it. The original blueprint was engineered 400 years ago by a desperate republic and a royal house without a crown. The House of Orange realized, long before anyone else, that capital could be far more potent than crowns. They transformed trade into a corporate-state hybrid, and they scaled that model across centuries and continents. The Netherlands may no longer rule the seas, but Dutch capital now moves across borders with more influence than fleets ever could. The VOC is dead, but its ideas, the limited liability corporation, the speculative stock market, the separation of profit from accountability, are now the default operating system of the entire global economy. This brings us to a question that still matters, more than ever, today. The Dutch East India Company proved that markets could hold the power once reserved for monarchs. So, if markets now hold that power, who governs the markets? Who holds the crown when the crown is invisible?